Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today we're exploring two jazz giants, Charlie Bird Parker, revolutionary saxophonist, and maybe a lesser-known name, Buster Smith, his influential mentor. Our sources today, some excerpts from pasted text. Looks like someone's notes for another podcast, but that's okay. We'll be the jazz detectives here, sifting through for clues. What do you say?
I'm in for it.
Okay, so big question. How does musical genius develop? How do those figures behind the scenes, the hidden figures, shape what becomes groundbreaking?
Fascinating stuff to think about. Yeah, we're always so focused on the big names, the dazzling solos, but those foundational influences, not always so obvious.
Right, like Buster Smith. He's not exactly a household name, but if you follow jazz, you know his impact. Huge impact, particularly through mentoring Parker. Undeniable. So let's start with him. Born in Texas in 1904, and he ends up in the Kansas City jazz scene, which, for anyone who follows jazz, you know that was like real melting pot of styles back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And Smith, not just any musician, he's in that scene. He mastered not one, not two, but three saxophones. Alto, clarinet, and tenor sax.
Wow. That's some serious versatility.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive on its own.
It is. But then there's the nickname. This is what gets me. Professor Smith. You don't get called professor in that world unless you've got some serious knowledge and a way of teaching it. That really makes an impact. What do you think? What earned him that title?
More than just his technical skill, From what I've read, Smith was known for his deep understanding of harmony and his ability to improvise. Complex, but also deeply rooted in the blues tradition. He wasn't just playing notes. He was telling stories through his music.
And imagine being a young Charlie Parker, soaking all of this in. That's Kansas City jazz scene in the 1930s. What a crucible.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Like so, yeah.
Extended jam sessions, musicians learning by doing, pushing each other's boundaries. It was, the dominant style was swing. That big band sound, emphasis on danceable rhythms. But in Kansas City, things were getting stretched. Boundaries were blurred. Perfect environment for innovation.
And then into this scene walks Charlie Parker, born 1920. Also in Kansas City, obsessed with music. From a young age, some stories say, he practiced up to 15 hours a day.
Wow. That's dedication.
That's a level of dedication. That is just mind-blowing.
It is. It speaks to almost an obsessive desire to master his craft. And it's here that Smith's mentorship becomes so crucial. He wasn't just teaching Parker scales or exercises. He was showing him how to think musically, how to improvise, how to use those deep blues roots to create something entirely new.
Let's dig into that a little bit. If we were to listen to Smith and Parker side by side, how would you describe their individual styles? And how can we hear those seeds of bebop that you were mentioning in Smith's playing?
Well, Smith's style, undeniably rooted in swing, but with a sophistication and depth that set him apart. His tone was warm and clear, what some jazz folks would call a Texas sound, with a focus on melody. He wasn't all about flashy runs. He wanted the melody to sing, you could hear. His blues influences in the way he bent notes, his phrasing, smooth and lyrical, often sticking to the traditional 8-bar structure of swing.
And Parker, how did he build on that?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Parker took those elements, the blues feeling, the harmonic sophistication, and transformed them. His tone went sharper, more biting, an edge that really cut through. His phrasing was more adventurous. He extended his lines across bar lines, created this sense of continuous flow, and his harmonic ideas, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in jazz.
And that's what would eventually become bebop.
Right.
That breakneck speed, the unpredictable melodies, those complex harmonies.
Yeah.
That made people sit up and listen. It was a revolution.
It was.
And Parker became the face of that revolution. But it's important to remember where those ideas came from.
Yeah.
Those late-night jam sessions in Kansas City, those hours spent learning from someone like Buster Smith. That's where the seeds of bebop were planted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're tracing those roots of bebop back to Kansas City those days. What elements of Smith's playing can we hear in Parker's style, and where did Parker really break new ground?
Well, both men masters of improvisation, but they approached it differently. Smith's solos often built around clearly defined melodic ideas, phrases you could sing along with. Even when the harmony got complex, he was a master of building tension and release within those traditional 8-bar structures, creating a narrative arc with his instrument.
And Parker, he just kind of threw those structures out the window sometimes, right?
He did, and that's part of what makes bebop so exciting. Parker's improvisations were like streams of consciousness, ideas flowing into each other, breaking free from those traditional boundaries. But what's interesting is that you can still hear Smith's influence in the way Parker used those rapid-fire arpeggios and chromatic runs to create melodic interest, even when he was playing at, breakneck speed.
Our notes here say one of Smith's signature techniques was using blues slurs, sliding between notes to create that soulful bent sound. Did Parker adopt that too?
He did, yeah, but he took it to another level. Smith's blues slurs were often subtle, just adding a touch of melancholy to his solos. Parker, on the other hand, used them with more intensity, almost like he was wringing every ounce of emotion out of those bent notes. It became a key part of his signature sound.
It's funny, we always talk about Parker's incredible technique, speed and dexterity, but for me it's the emotionality of his playing that really gets me. He could express so much through that saxophone. Pure joy to like gut-wrenching sadness.
Yeah, and that's where those blues roots really shine through. Both Smith and Parker understood that jazz was more than just notes on a page. It was about feeling, about storytelling, about connecting with an audience on a visceral level.
And I think that's one of the reasons bebop resonated so strongly with people, even though it was such a departure from what they were used to hearing. It was fresh and exciting, but it was also deeply rooted in that blues tradition, that shared emotional language.
Exactly. It wasn't just a technical exercise. It was a cultural movement, a reflection of the changing times. And I think that's a testament to both Smith and Parker's artistry. They understood that innovation isn't just about breaking the rules. It's about pushing boundaries while staying connected to the heart of the music.
Speaking of breaking boundaries, let's go back to Smith releasing his solo album, The Legendary Buster Smith, in 1959. Makes you wonder how we measure success and influence, in the music world.
It's a great question for some musicians. It's about commercial success, selling records, filling concert halls for others. It's about critical acclaim, winning awards, and being recognized by their peers. But for someone like Buster Smith, it seems like his greatest legacy was the impact he had on other musicians like Charlie Parker.
That classic musician's musician.
Right. Precisely respected within the industry, but perhaps not as well known to the general public, but his influence is undeniable. You listen to Smith's playing, you can hear those early glimmers of the harmonic and rhythmic innovations that Parker would later take to a whole other level. It's like Smith provided the blueprint and Parker ran with it, creating something entirely new and groundbreaking.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone hearing bebop for the first time. Say you're in a smoky jazz club in the 1940s. Parker and his band take the stage. What's that experience like? It must have been mind-blowing.
Oh, probably both exhilarating and disorienting. Imagine hearing those rapid tempos, the unpredictable melodies, the complex harmonies. It was a world away from the smooth, danceable rhythms of swing. Some people were probably baffled. Others were intrigued, and a few, like the young musicians who would go on to shape the future of jazz, they were absolutely captivated.
And that's how revolutions happen, right? Someone pushes the boundaries, challenges the status quo, and opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Exactly, but those revolutions are rarely built in a vacuum. They need a foundation, a history, a network of mentors and collaborators who help shape those revolutionary ideas.
So in the case of bebop, that foundation was laid in those Kansas City jam sessions, nurtured by musicians like Buster Smith, who were willing to experiment to push the limits of what jazz could be.
And that spirit of experimentation, that willingness to embrace the unknown, is what continues to drive the evolution of jazz today.
It really makes you wonder what those early bebop shows were like for the average listener. Did they get it right away, or did it take a while for audiences to catch up to what these musicians were doing?
I think it's safe to say bebop wasn't for everyone. Remember, this was a time when swing was still incredibly popular. People were used to those danceable rhythms, those catchy melodies. Bebop, with its complex harmonies and unpredictable improvisations, was a radical departure from that.
Yeah, it must have sounded like a completely different language to some folks.
Exactly. But for those who were willing to listen with open ears, it was a revelation. It was music that demanded your attention, challenged you to think differently about what jazz could be. And of course, for the younger generation of musicians, it was a call to arms. They heard Parker and his contemporaries pushing the boundaries, and they wanted to be a part of that.
That's how those musical revolutions happen, right? It's not just about the innovators themselves. It's about the audience that embraces them and the next generation that carries the torch.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the idea of legacy. We talked about Smith's only solo album released late in his career and Parker's extensive and influential discography. What does that tell us about how we measure a musician's impact?
It's interesting, isn't it? For Parker, we have those classic recordings, Bird and Diz, Charlie Parker with strings. Now's the time. These are essential listening for any jazz fan. But for Smith, the legacy is a little more subtle, passed down through those he mentored and the musicians who were inspired by his unique approach to swing.
And that's a valuable lesson in itself. Influence can take many forms. It's not always about the number of albums you sell or the awards you win. It's about the connections you make, the knowledge you share, and the inspiration you spark in others. In that sense, I think both Smith and Parker left behind incredibly rich legacies, albeit in different ways.
Almost like two sides of the same coin. Parker, the innovator who pushed the boundaries of what was possible on the saxophone, and Smith, the mentor who laid the groundwork for that innovation, nurturing the talent that would change the course of jazz history.
And that's why I think it's so important to remember those hidden figures, the mentors, the teachers, the collaborators, who may not always get the same level of recognition, but whose contributions are essential to understanding the evolution of any art form.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have a question for you, the listener. Who are the Buster Smiths in your own life? Who are the people who have shaped your thinking, inspired your creativity, or helped you find your own voice?
Take a moment to think about those individuals, the ones who may not be famous or widely recognized, but whose influence has made a profound impact on your journey.
And who knows, maybe you're the Buster Smith for someone else, guiding them on their path, sharing your knowledge and inspiring them to reach new heights.
It's a wonderful thought, isn't it? The interconnectedness of human experience, the way we all contribute to the ongoing symphony of life.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of jazz mentorship and the hidden connections that shape history. Go listen to both Buster Smith and Charlie Parker and hear those connections for yourself. You won't regret it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.